Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about some of these guys from the Middle Ages that kind of help the Middle Ages get started, and how the kingdoms kind of emerge. And then this guy here with the cool hair, which is Charlemagne. So we're going to look at three guys today: Clovis, Charles Martel, and Charlemagne, and we'll kind of look at some of their accomplishments. And I'll tell you what is the most important thing to remember about each one, just like one thing that kind of stands out about them. So after the Roman Empire falls, we have all these little kingdoms that jump up. So you can see there's a lot of them. The kingdom of the Visigoths, they were one of the invaders. The Ostrogoths, one of the invaders. The Franks, that's kind of where we're going to focus right here, is this orange area. So once those Roman Empire areas are gone, we see the borders start to change constantly because all these little kingdoms set up shop and they each have their own borders, but then maybe one attacks another and their borders change a little bit. So for a long time there, the borders are going to switch around to different kingdoms. Family ties and personal loyalty are way more important than public government and the law at that time, which makes sense because when you have this kind of massive shift and upheaval and the government systems aren't stable, people look to their families, they look to their friends, that's who you're loyal to. You don't care about all these governments that switch around too often. So it's kind of impossible to establish a real government when everybody's more loyal to their families. So we have Clovis that we're going to talk about first. The Franks had power in Gaul, which is this area here. This is modern day France, and this darker area is modern day Switzerland. Clovis is the leader of the Franks, and Christianity plays a huge role from this point on in our class for world history. Christianity is going to play a big role in how people act and how they develop. Clovis is the first king to be a Christian, and he brings it to that region. He is worried that he's going to be defeated by another tribe, so he appeals to the Christian God. In the middle of a battle, they're getting beat up on by another group. And in the middle of the battle, he drops to his knees and he starts praying to his God. And then suddenly they start winning. So everybody's like really convinced that Clovis's God obviously has a lot of power because they were losing the battle and then they start winning the battle. So right there on the spot after the battle is born Clovis, and 3,000 of his worshippers are baptized to the Christian religion because they believe that Clovis's God helped them win. By 511, Clovis has kind of united the Franks into one kingdom and brought all those families together in that orange area on the map. So now the Franks control the largest and strongest of all of Europe's kingdoms. So the rest of those kingdoms you see are not as strong as the Frankish kingdoms. And when he dies, the Franks control most of modern day France. That's where we get the idea of calling it France because it comes from the Franks. So we talked last week about this position of the mayor of the palace. So this position becomes really powerful. It's like who you would give the job to your best friend if you were suddenly a king or a queen. And they run the entire household. They lead the army, they make policy, they pay all your bills. And the problem with that is you're giving somebody a lot of power when you decide to do that. Charles Martel, or he's also known as Charles the Hammer, because instead of using a sword in battle, he used a hammer in battle. He held more power than the king himself. So he's therefore going to try and overthrow his king and become the leader of that area. He goes into a big battle against Muslim raiders from Spain. It's called the Battle of Tours. And he's able to stop the Muslims from invading any further. So for the rest of the world, they see him as a Christian hero because he's able to stop them. And at his death, he passes the power to Pepin the Short. Pepin the Short wasn't actually short as far as like his height. A lot of these names, because people didn't generally have the last name that they used at that time, described part of their personality. So it's probably more likely that he had maybe a short temper or a short fuse as opposed to being a short guy. So Pepin is the father of this guy here, Charles the Great. And when Pepin dies, Charles the Great becomes the leader in 771. We call him Charlemagne. That's another way to say his name. He's a very imposing figure at 6'4", and that may not seem very tall now, but the average height of a man at that time would have been 5'6". So I'm 5'6". 6'4" is significantly taller than me. So if most men walking around are 5'6", and then this guy comes on scene at 6'4", he's going to seem like he's much bigger than everybody else. So he is now what we call the most powerful king in Western Europe at that time. He built an empire greater than anything we'd seen since the Romans. He beats the Muslims in several different battles and spreads Christianity throughout Europe. And he unites Western Europe for the first time since the Roman Empire. So he has a lot of things that he did that were really good. It becomes known as the Holy Roman Empire. Rome being the place where the Catholic Church has its most power because that's where the Pope lives. So he calls it the Holy Roman Empire. And he strengthens himself by weakening the rich people in the area. He makes sure that he doesn't give them too much land or too many titles so that he's really powerful. And he's also the one that sent out the royal agents to check on people as like spies, the missi dominici, so that he could keep a check on all these really rich guys to make sure they're not doing things that he didn't want them to. Another thing Charlemagne did that most kings do not do is that he actually leaves his palace on a regular basis and goes out and visits his kingdom. He visits his people and says, what do you need? What's the biggest problem? How can I help? Most kings don't really care about that stuff. They might send other people out, but Charlemagne actually went out into his community himself and talked to his people. And he wanted everybody to get educated. Because we had this big lapse in education for a while, he wanted people to realize that learning was really important and that you could become very powerful if you are educated. So he opened monasteries, which were schools at that time, and he surrounded himself with really smart people, which is what I would do if I became a leader. I don't consider myself to be really, really smart, but if I was a leader, I would surround myself with lots of smart people. The smartest person in the military helps me with the military. The smartest person when it comes to crops would help me with, agriculture. So you don't have to be the smartest person to become a leader. You just have to surround yourself with it. Eventually, he goes to Rome. The Pope crowns him emperor, so it's even bigger than being a king. And what we see in this picture is that the Pope actually has more power than the king. The king is kneeling before the Pope, and the Pope is giving him a crown, which shows us that the Pope had more power than the king had at that time. And that tells us that the church is really, really powerful. Charlemagne died in 814, and his grandsons split up the kingdom, and they each took a section of his empire. This is a really bad idea. Whenever you break something up, you make it weaker automatically. And the grandsons are just going to fight with each other all the time. And authority breaks down, and we see kind of a complete collapse of Charlemagne's empire. And we see the rise to feudalism, which we're going to spend like 2-3 days on that this week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because it's a really important concept. So as a result of all this stuff, what did we just learn? All right, so using Christianity, Clovis is able to unite all the Franks into a strong Christian military power. Charles Martel then solidifies that, which then leads to the rise of the most powerful king in Europe, which is Charlemagne. So without Christianity in there, without that element of what people believe, none of this could have happened to create this giant kingdom here. Okay, so that's it for today. Tomorrow you're going to do a Charlemagne worksheet, which will pop up on Google Classroom. You click on it. Again, if you can't type on it for some strange reason, which I've already made it so that you can, then just go over to the File tab and click on Make a Copy, and it should allow you to type on it there.